Approximately half an hour before the start of this script, I'd finished recording a log speculation piece on the nature of the mysterious Feranmut proxy underwriting the joint Endfield Hongshan Sheernite project, keeping Wuling from collapsing into the Very Large Rift. Even prior to this, I was already speculating on the nature of the Sheernite energies used to combat Ruan Yi at the climax of patch 1.1, and was certain that the big secret behind her identity was that one of the 12 Sui proxies of Arknights had managed to wander her way into another world. I was sure I figured her identity out. Her emblem was everywhere in Wuling. The nature of her value was a stark parallel with her original story of Arknights. Even the assets from the yearly New Year's event was a 1-to-1 match with the architecture of Wuling. And I was wrong. It's not Shu. As confirmed by the official accounts, there is a 13th proxy. In fact, there might already be a nascent 13th proxy in Arknights, born from the long-labored design of 3 inhuman mothers. The confirmation of her existence is deeply consequential to damn near every aspect of Endfield lore as well, or as little of its 150-year history we've managed to uncover. But before we dig into that, we need to catch some of you up to speed. Let's first introduce you to Terrans. Not the ones you know. The true Terrans, the first living things upon the face of the planet, the first to hold dominion over its depths and reaches, and may yet once again claim mastery in time. The race known as Feranmut, whose divine powers and gargantuan forms of Sarkas, who were once Tikas, worshipped before the corruption by Originium. They, in contrast, are all but immune to Oripathy in any form, though not to precursor meddling influence in general. But though they were not equal to those that fled the stars, the Feranmut had their own ineffable power to command. Arts, or magic power, without Originium is all but non-existent in the eyes of the lay humans that roam Terra's surface. But its divine natures are capable of wielding power that border or even exceed the idea of miracles. Fire that can scorch down a country, footsteps that can make whole continents tremble, all the way to warping time, space, and the laws of causality itself in one particularly infamous case. Fascinatingly, it's implied that the Feranmut's gifts may exceed the understanding of even the precursors. Though the latter had incredible mastery over fundamental physics, biology, and even psychology, the Feranmut race had evolved in such a way as to defy physical principles seemingly at will, so long as they were within a domain they had established influence over. Until a certain point in Terran prehistory, they were also once numerous and plentiful until one fateful day, when that eye which broke the heavens caught notice. Now, the assumption here is that they ran into the same fate as the precursors, that they caught the attention of the observers and were nearly annihilated in the process. Yes, comparatively lacking in technical advancement in the sciences as the Feranmut are compared to the precursors, they did something unheard of to the priestess, the oracle, or damn near anybody else capable of even awareness of the observers as a threat. Apparently, they fought them directly, and apparently, they might have even won. The surviving Feranmut of present day didn't have the control over Terra wrested from them by the observers. Even as the initial seeds of Originium were planted deep within the planet, they still held sway for untold tens of thousands of years, and were worshipped by the lesser beings that evolved into sapiens. It is an interesting reflection of Feranmut's psychology that they didn't consider their de facto status as worship gods to be a position of authority as we understand it. Rather, that their worshippers were a part of their domain itself and were treated or neglected accordingly. It's important at this time to know that this also included what physical avatar they might possess. That thing knows that Feranmut individual is not just the face it wears, but all that lies within its recognized domain, making it difficult to distinguish the overall true form or scope of such beings. Ultimately, however, godlike is relative to the external party interacting with them. To the Tikas that worship them, their divinity was obvious, because it was impossible for their race to comprehend ever becoming a Feranmut's equal. Same with the elves and the latter pan-humanity that sprang up through Originium's influence. To the 9 omnipotent precursors, however, they were a curiosity, though certainly powerful enough to be interesting, and were described in precursor communication as friends at times. In fact, the interchange between precursor and Feranmut runs deeper than the scope of this analysis and speculation video will allow. But suffice to say, one of the most powerful and dangerous factions in all of Arknights stirs beneath the depths of its unexplored oceans, born out of cooperation between ancient Feranmuts and precursor geneticists as one of the many gambits to thwart observer interference. It might even be, in the long run, inevitably successful, if ill-fated for the rest of existence, should the full scope of their status quo ambitions bear fruit without further influence or interference. But to go back to the central matter, if there can be anything said to be a shortcoming for Feranmuts, it's that their completeness as sapient entities is also what limits them. Barring the great war against the heavens in Terran's most ancient of days, a Feranmut's primary and sole concern tends to be their own domains. Cooperation among each other is otherwise infrequent. Breeding a new generation is far from a priority for nigh-immortal beings for whom 1,000 years can be slept through. And though they speak of each other as kin at times, it's just as common for kin to be rivals and enemies for desired resources. Furthermore, they share two key characteristics with the mortals they sometimes aloofly refer to as mere ants. One, they are not immune to the siren song of ambition. And two, they can be killed, with some hesitant clauses on what killed actually means for entities for whom causality is a mere suggestion. At minimum, a Feranmut's physical presence and bulk of their material power can be removed from the world for some time. This was the end result of the Proto-Yan Empire's Great Hunt, spearheaded by the first True-Lung who was allied with the Feranmut Sui. Sui was driven to fratricide through a simple matter of greed, a rare display of covetousness from the being that held the power of evolution, who wished to be the sole god worshipped by the ancient Yan tribes. By the time of Sui's betrayal, he knew or surmised that the human tribes had learned of the Feranmut gravesites that proved that they were ultimately not the omnipotent and omniscient gods they portrayed themselves as to the worshippers they lorded over. The early Yan's reverence turned dark when their suspicions grew that the Feranmuts didn't just protect them from disasters, but that their alien values and priorities had caused human misery as well. Sui encouraged this fearfulness and led his powers to help drive his kin from Yan domain. But his conspiracy and designs on either party was discovered by both parties. He was gravely wounded and cursed by his king with wounds that refused to heal, and subjugated in turn by the Yan, his physical body entombed as the power grew with a successful rebellion against their former gods. For the longest time, this was the end of the Master of Evolution, a restless stasis beneath the shackles of a mortal realm that learned to distrust him. But as the years passed, so did Sui's status evolve. 12 parts of his consciousness diverged, started asking a critical question of who am I when separated from him, and 12 answers emerged, soon bearing form, names, and personal aspirations. The siblings were born because even a sleeping god's dreams have an existential weight more than equal to any mortal, but as they grew to the sense of self, integrating into Yan culture in ways that their forebear would have never thought of doing, it became clear that they all shared an existential threat as well. After all, a dead god need not stay dead, and when Sui wakes, and indeed they know his consciousness slowly stirs again over the long years, what then of his 12 named dreams? So far in Arknights, there are two competing projects. One spearheaded by the second oldest of the 12, and the others a result of his younger siblings. Wang II, former martial strategist for the Yan Empire and his reigning king of Weiqi, plotted to replace Sui's intellect entirely, sacrificing his own mortal form to overtake his father's, plotted even against the court of Yan to marshal such forces and resources to make this possible. He did this for multifarious reasons, the preservation of his siblings being but one. Atonement was another, for his first attempt to do so was marred by the death of Jie V, whose mastery over words was what granted the 12 the names that anchored their identities in existence. Addressing grievances was another, for it was the Yan court, fearful of Jie's Feranmut-born powers to rewrite their very history, that plotted to turn her into sacrifice. All three reasons were fulfilled as of Lunar New Year 2026, when the stone heart at the center of the Jingyu main mine, the fundamental source of Yan wealth, was plunged into the great behemoth, giving Wang the opening he needed to enact his main plan, and damn himself into an effective eternity of Originium-born agony as the physical manifestation of Sui's body was slowly consumed from inside out. Not coincidentally, also sealing the prime Originium from the priestess's influence. But whether countless centuries of damnation is truly Wang's fate is still to be determined. His innermost plan to revive Jie is as yet unfulfilled, and his younger siblings, they too have succeeded. Thanks to Shu's work in particular, it's their success that now roams the lunar surface of Talos II, challenging the fate that awaits their people. The original Feranmut's Heart, as recently described by the Endfield official account, was a joint project between Nian IX, and the Yan Empire's greatest minds to construct a device capable of storing a Feranmut proxy's consciousness, even in the demise of its originator. At this point in time, the cultural integration between Sui proxies and the Yanese culture had effectively become inextricable. Despite historical tensions, the 12 siblings' long history with their mortal neighbors had impacted everything from law and poetry to blacksmithing and even cuisine. And the Yan Empire understood that their long-term prosperity was intertwined at a karmic level to the fate of the 12 as well. But Nyan's personal domain was shape. To truly fulfill the intent of the project, she enlisted the aid of her sisters Dusk and Shu to grant the device will and causality respectively, and just in time as fate's winds blew in Shu's direction barely soon after the device's completion. Shu's integration among the mortal Yan was more profound than many of her siblings and more humble by many measures. While her elder siblings formed Yan's martial spirit, legal systems, riches, cultures, and more, Shu farmed. For 1,000 years, she labored in the north, sharing the sweat of her exertion beneath the weltering sun and the warmth of the bonfire underneath the frigid winter's moon with generations of laborers in Da Huang, the breadbasket of the vast reaches of the Yanese people. For 1,000 years, unlike her nomadic siblings, she made herself part of the mortal people, disguising herself as a humble non-yi Tianxi that simply knew her way around the agricultural business as well as any learned expert can, working towards the day that their efforts would produce a particular green miracle, a crop resistant to originian pollution, capable of flourishing even amid catastrophe, one born without usage of her divine Feranmut powers. This was, after all, critical. The death of her elder sister had ontological consequences. Mortals that were once closest with the Yan's greatest writer had forgotten her name. The tools she personally devised, all but one crucial implement, crumbling to mere dust in her absence. All that lingered was that which she wrote with mundane ink, and the lessons she taught as transcribed by mortal writers. The 12 pagodas planned as devised by Nyan and the Yanese powers were as much about preventing the loss of their intertwined past as it was a matter of survival. That plan was put to the test in 2024 when Shu's 1,000-year vigilance over Da Huang was shattered by collapsal blight. Herein is why the original version of this script was built upon the assumption that the secret Feranmut at the heart of Wuling was Shu, because the parallels between her story and the Share Night goddess of Wuling are too obvious to ignore. Here too are an agricultural people sweating and thriving for their very survival, with Shu's emblems of office at the very center of their city, and very explicitly and uniquely Dan Huang architecture found even in their scientific institutes. Here a thread of blight. And remember that the core thesis of my analyses thus far is that Aether and Collapso can be understood as the same concepts under different names. Shu's history with Da Huang was not just due to the legacy of her first mortal friend, the now deified Shenong, whose agricultural contributions to Yang were revered even onto present day, nor merely due to her promise to Shenong to watch over the labors that they shared it. Rather, unbeknownst to Yan history, Shenong's search for originium-resistant crop had brought her to the far reaches of the far north, and brought back something twisted. The last satchel of seeds she brought back before her demise was corrupted, blight-ridden, and until Shu's vigilance wavered, it took her presence to suppress the influence, and took her sacrifice to rid the land of its malignity. Thus we arrive at the heart of the matter. Share Night's utility against Aether is Shu's very legacy, known since Terran times through her sacrifice, that Feranmut's divine essence can cleanse a land of collapsal blight through mutual destruction. And luckily, Shu's sacrifice was but temporary as well, as the machinations of her younger sisters and brother Ji woke the Feranmut's heart for the very first time, a chaotic, desperate newborn cry that forced its three mothers to fight for their very survival against the will of an artificial Sui. But this was a fight that was truly won, because it's not a fight of fists and fang or of steel and arts. It was a fight in the way a drowsy person fights to wake. A fight that she had already won by virtue of being a Sui proxy, the day she walked out her forebear's tomb asking, "Who am I?" But this too is critical. To depart from something means leaving it behind. In her departure from the massive chaotic energy that was the Feranmut's heart, she left behind its fearful intellect, calm and kind admonishments. To seek people, to learn how they live, to witness their striving, and understand how they hew hope and till triumph from the soil itself. And thus was the 13th proxy born, not from the dreams of a slumbering god, but from the hopes of divinities and the technologies of mortals. And perhaps because of this, she was unique among the 13 in being free to follow her people, her domain, to distant alien shores. This too is why I thought it was Shu at first, because even as we now accept the existence of a 13th proxy, as originally theorized by Redditor SunsetBlink 322, even before the official confirmation, we also have to accept a central irony in her story. The 13th proxy must now stand guard like one of her mothers once did against the very same threat that lurked neath the soil of Da Huang, all while tending the same amber-grained Shu labor to help birth, and lending her strength to the same institutes that were once built to the exact same floor plans. This would have probably caused her Uncle G tremendous emotional turmoil, given the conspiracies he had to enact to free his sister from her 1,000-year obligation. It would probably made him even angrier if he knew that somebody was conspiring to kill her. Back in my analysis of 1.1's climax with Ron Yi, I speculated that he was recruited by Ardashir for two particular reasons. One, because of the nature of his blight corruption was proof that human compatibility with the Aether was possible, even without the dangerous witch engineering undergone by Ursa's mystics to produce the dreaded Emperor's blades of Terran infamy. Two, that God must be slain by a god killer. The 13th stands guard over Wuling as his patron deity, her direct intervention required to produce the Shiranite miracle that allowed stability in the region at all. But though her birth was a complex one involving human technologies, she is ultimately still Feranmut, and subject to Feranmut logic. And it still sits strangely with me that though the Feranmut's heart is known as a critical contribution to the development of the Shiranite, her name is absent among all official documentation thus far. We've been heavily spoiled to the major plot beats for patch 1.2, and we know that Ardashir and Nefereth have designs for the Wuling Dam. More critically, destroying the main dam is in itself probably not enough to satisfy their aim. If a Feranmut's influence upon the world is subject to ontological inertia, then what happens to all Shiranite in existence if the 13th dies? Thus their go, or at least what I'm speculating as their intent in Wuling. Crush the heart, free the rift, and without a Feranmut to interfere, sublimate the entire region. After all, that nearly happened just 10 years ago. We'll see how much of this holds true when 1.2 lands this week.